Julia Weber always believed fate would take her back to Egypt. At 39, she was one of Germany's most respected Egyptologists, having devoted 15 years to studying pharaonic civilization. Her Berlin apartment was a small museum, statuettes of Anubis, framed papyri, books on hieroglyphics, and replicas of artifacts she'd catalogued throughout her career. It was March 2023 when Julia arrived in Cairo for the 5th time, leading an expedition from the Berlin National Museum to document discoveries in Saqqara. The city welcomed her with familiar chaos, deafening traffic, spices mixed with desert dust, and that unique energy only the cradle of civilization conveys. "Dr. Weber," said her local assistant Ahmed on the second day, "there's a businessman who'd very much like to meet you. He finances private excavations and has a keen interest in archaeological projects." Julia hesitated. Tourism entrepreneurs often exploited sites for profit rather than preserving them. But Ahmed insisted, "Dr. Mahmoud al-Rashid is highly respected here. His family has a tradition of historical preservation going back generations." The meeting took place on the terrace of the old Winter Palace Hotel overlooking the Nile. Mahmoud al-Rashid was impressive, tall, dark, around 44, wearing an impeccable suit with scarab-shaped cufflinks. His eyes sparkled with genuine intelligence when discussing history. "Dr. Weber," he said in fluent English with a charming accent, "it's an honor to meet someone who's dedicated their life to preserving our heritage. I've read your articles on funeral rituals of the 18th dynasty. Fascinating." Julia was surprised. Few businessmen bothered with academic literature. Over 3 hours, Mahmoud demonstrated impressive Egyptology knowledge, quoting her texts, asking intelligent questions, and sharing family stories about traditions dating to pharaonic times. "My great-grandmother used to say our family descended from scribes at the Temple of Karnak," he said with a smile mixing pride and modesty. "That's what led me into cultural tourism. My company, Eternal Sands Cultural Tours, specializes in exclusive archaeological experiences for European visitors, not mass tourism, but small groups truly interested in history." Over the following days, Mahmoud appeared often at Julia's work sites. Always respectful, never interfering but offering valuable insights into local traditions. Julia's Egyptian colleagues seemed to respect him, and he demonstrated intimate knowledge of regional excavations. "There's something special about this place," he said one afternoon watching sunset from the Giza pyramids. "The ancients chose every stone with purpose. They built for eternity and they succeeded. Here we are 4,500 years later, still fascinated." Julia felt deeply connected to someone who shared her passion so eloquently. The conversations became personal. Mahmoud was divorced, childless, devoted entirely to business and cultural preservation. "Sometimes I wonder if I chose loneliness in the name of history," he confessed. "But when I meet someone like you who truly understands the importance of what we do, I think maybe it's worth it." Julia, who devoted herself so much to her career she'd never married, felt a connection she hadn't experienced in years. When he invited her to dinner at his apartment to show pieces from his family's collection, she accepted without hesitation. The apartment in Zamalek was elegant but not ostentatious, decorated with apparent antiques and books in Arabic, English, and French. Mahmoud's collection was impressive. Original amulets, papyrus fragments, small statuettes he swore were from legal family excavations. "This statuette of Thoth belonged to my great-grandfather," he said, showing her a bronze piece. He worked with Howard Carter during excavations in the Valley of the Kings. During candlelit dinner, Mahmoud shared his business plans. "I dream of creating a themed hotel near the pyramids, not a run-of-the-mill resort, but a complete educational experience. Rooms inspired by pharaonic tombs with modern comforts. Daily lectures by renowned Egyptologists. A chance to live history." "That would be incredible," Julia sighed. "A place where tourism and education come together respectfully." "Exactly. And I need someone with your expertise to make it happen. Someone who can ensure every detail is historically accurate and culturally respectful." The proposal was tempting. Julia had always dreamed of making Egyptology accessible without vulgarizing it. When her expedition ended, she felt torn between Berlin routine and the possibilities Mahmoud offered. The night before her flight, he made a proposal that would change everything. "Julia, what if I offered you a real partnership? You bring academic expertise, I contribute capital and local knowledge. Together we could create something revolutionary." "Mahmoud, it's incredible, but my life is in Berlin. My work, my research. What if you could do all that here? Research, teach, preserve, but impacting thousands instead of just academics." Think of the legacy we could build together. Back in Berlin, Julia felt restless, as if part of her remained in Egypt's sands. Mahmoud kept constant contact via WhatsApp, sending photos, articles, always asking about her research progress. In May, 3 months after her return, Mahmoud called with a concrete proposal. "Julia, I found the perfect location, 15 minutes from Giza pyramids overlooking the desert. But I need to decide quickly." He explained he'd secured international investors requiring a renowned Egyptologist as managing partner. "Your name and reputation are essential to securing funding. How much would I need to invest?" "For 30% of the venture, euro 200,000. With external investors, we're talking a €5 million project total." It was exactly what Julia had inherited from her parents, kept as a retirement fund. "I need to think about it. Of course, my love. But opportunities like this come once in a lifetime. It's not just money, it's fulfilling your dream." Over following weeks, Mahmoud intensified his courtship. Flowers with hieroglyphic cards, Friday night calls about history, carefully chosen gifts. A miniature Tutankhamun sarcophagus replica, papyrus with her name in hieroglyphics, rare Egyptology books unavailable in Germany. In June, Mahmoud video called showing vast land with pyramid views. "This is our future." The camera revealed partially buried ruins. The owner discovered ancient structures, possibly a pyramid workers' village. "Imagine the archaeological potential. You could lead legal excavations while we develop the hotel." Julia's heart raced. An archaeological discovery of her own was any Egyptologist's dream. Mahmoud showed official-looking documents with government stamps. "The investors have made a decision. If you don't join by month's end, they'll move forward with another archaeologist. A professor from the Sorbonne is interested." The possibility of losing the opportunity to a French rival awakened Julia's competitive instinct. "Mahmoud, if I accept, how would it work?" "You'd move to Cairo initially, to my Zamalek apartment while we arrange suitable accommodation. We'd start immediately with preliminary excavations while developing architectural plans." "What about my museum work?" "Julia, you're 39. How many years will you spend cataloging pieces discovered by others? This is your chance to make your own discoveries, create something lasting." During that week, Julia barely slept. She researched Mahmoud's company, professional website, impeccable references. She talked to colleagues, divided between envy and concern. "Julia, it's incredible, but you hardly know this man," warned Dr. Schmidt. "And €200,000 is your entire net worth." But Mahmoud's voice echoed, "Your destiny is not to catalog the past, it is to discover it." On Thursday night, Julia made her decision. "I accept. I'm your partner." His cry of joy moved her. "Julia, you won't regret it. We're going to create something extraordinary." She spent the weekend organizing her life. Resigned from the museum, put her apartment up for rent, made bank transfers, planned her Cairo move. On Monday, Julia transferred €200,000 to Mahmoud's provided Cairo account. It was the biggest investment and biggest gamble of her life. Received, Mahmoud wrote. "Now we're official partners. Get ready for the adventure of a lifetime." Cairo International Airport had never seemed so welcoming. It was August 2023. Mahmoud waited at arrivals with lotus flowers, dressed in immaculate white linen like a modern prince. "Welcome to your new life, my love," he said, kissing her hand. "Egypt was incomplete without you." The Zamalek apartment had been rearranged for her. A makeshift office with light tables, specialized Egyptology library, even a small artifact preservation laboratory. The first days were magical. Mahmoud took her to archaeological sites rarely open to public, always with VIP access. They dined on terraces overlooking the Nile, visited Khan el-Khalili market, spent nights discussing Egyptian history. In the second week, Mahmoud took Julia to see the hotel land. The pyramid view was spectacular, the partially buried ruins promising. "My ministry contacts confirmed it. 4th dynasty structures, probably craftsmen's dwellings," Mahmoud explained. "When can we start excavating?" "Next week. I've hired a local team and obtained necessary permits." The following Monday, excavations began. Mahmoud had hired 12 experienced workers. Equipment was professional, proper stations, precision tools, cataloging systems. The first days were productive. The team discovered pottery shards, bronze tools, papyrus pieces Julia carefully cataloged. Everything followed proper protocols. At week 3's end, they made an extraordinary discovery, a sealed chamber with intact hieroglyphics and jewelry. "Mahmoud, you have to see this." An intact ritual deposit. Julia's excitement was contagious. She photographed meticulously, translated hieroglyphs, worked late cataloging each piece. These are funerary amulets from the 18th dynasty, she explained. Some may be unique in archaeological literature. Mahmoud watched with interest, asking about historical value, rarity, preservation. How would you determine market value of pieces like these? Mahmoud, we don't talk market value in archaeology, Julia laughed. These are human heritage, not commodities. Of course, just academic curiosity. Around week 4, Julia noticed inconsistencies. Workers excavated unauthorized areas. Smaller pieces disappeared before complete cataloging. Mahmoud had Arabic conversations with Omar, the supervisor, that stopped when she approached. But discoveries continued being extraordinary: more sealed chambers, papyri with unpublished texts, exceptional quality jewelry. Julia was so absorbed she didn't notice when Mahmoud began bringing collectors for private visits. It was week 5's end when Julia discovered the truth. Arriving early at the site, she found Mahmoud showing pieces to an unknown man. "This Thoth amulet is exceptional," the stranger said in American-accented English. "How much?" $15,000. "A unique piece," Dr. Julia confirmed. Julia's blood ran cold. Mahmoud was selling archaeological finds. The pieces she'd catalogued as World Heritage were being illegally traded. She hid and continued listening. "And the papyri? Those are more expensive, $50,000 for the lot. Unpublished texts translated by Germany's best Egyptologist." Julia realized with horror she wasn't participating in legitimate excavation. She was being used as technical expert in an antiquities trafficking operation. Her knowledge authenticated and increased value of stolen pieces. Mahmoud al-Rashid had never been a cultural tourism entrepreneur. He was an international criminal who'd orchestrated their entire relationship to exploit her expertise. She was in the Egyptian desert, far from home, completely dependent on a man she'd just discovered was an art trafficker, with €200,000 of her savings in his hands, and now knowing too much about his operations. Julia spent that night awake, heart pounding. Every kindness Mahmoud showed, every bit of knowledge shared, every contact, all carefully orchestrated to lure her into this trap. In the morning she tried acting normal. At the site, she discreetly tried photographing evidence. But Omar seemed to watch her every move more closely. Omar took her to an area she didn't know. To her surprise, there was a much larger operation than imagined. At least 30 workers and heavy equipment, definitely not for delicate archaeology. "What's all this?" she asked, alarmed. "Project Expansion," Mahmoud replied, appearing behind her. But his voice had a different tone, colder, more calculated. Julia watched workers using pickaxes and shovels in areas that should be excavated with brushes. "Mahmoud, these aren't proper archaeological methods. You're damaging artifacts." "Julia, my love, sometimes efficiency is more important than delicacy." For the first time, Mahmoud wasn't pretending. He showed his true colors, an efficient criminal seeing artifacts as commodities. "I want to see the pieces stored in a safe place," Julia said, voice steady. Omar took her to a large tent where Julia was horrified. Hundreds of artifacts carelessly piled. Broken statuettes, torn papyri, funerary jewelry mixed with pottery shards. Brutal violation of everything she believed. "My God, Mahmoud, this is vandalism. These pieces are being destroyed." "Some breakage is inevitable, Julia. The important thing is recovering what has commercial value." "Commercial value? These are priceless archaeological finds. World Heritage." Mahmoud laughed coldly. "Julia, you're an adorable dreamer. World Heritage doesn't pay bills. These priceless treasures are worth millions to private collectors." "You used me," Julia whispered. "All this time, you only wanted me to authenticate stolen pieces. You used yourself, my love. I just offered opportunity and you chose to believe what you wanted." Julia turned to leave, but Omar blocked her way. "Where do you think you're going?" "I'm leaving. Going to the German consulate to report all this." Mahmoud smiled coldly. "I'm afraid that's not possible. You know too much about our operation, our methods, contacts, buyers. You've become a liability. You can't stop me from leaving." "Actually, I can." Omar moved closer, pistol discreetly visible at his waist. Over following days, Julia found herself in a surreal situation. She continued cataloging discoveries, but now under constant surveillance. Omar or his men were always nearby, and at night someone searched her things. "Mahmoud, this can't go on forever." German authorities will notice my absence. Julia, you resigned from the museum, said you were moving to Egypt. No one's looking for you. It was true. Julia had burned all bridges, told everyone she was starting new life. Who would search for someone who'd voluntarily disappeared? Things worsened when Mahmoud brought international buyers. Dr. Weber will personally authenticate each piece. She's one of the world's leading Egyptology experts. Julia found herself forced to use her reputation enhancing stolen artifacts' value. Each authentication fueled the black market and encouraged further destruction. This papyrus contains a unique funerary text from the 18th dynasty, she had to tell an American collector. Extremely rare. How much? The man asked. $80,000, Mahmoud replied. With Dr. Weber's certificate of authenticity. After the buyer left, Julia exploded. You're forcing me to be accomplice to crimes against cultural heritage. You already are an accomplice. Your name is on all our authenticity certificates. If we're caught, you'll be considered the operation's intellectual leader. The truth hit Julia like a punch. Mahmoud had systematically documented her participation to make her the primary technical responsible. If discovered, she'd be seen as the academic mastermind. You planned this from the beginning. Of course. I needed a respected expert for credibility, and if something went wrong, someone to take the blame. That night, Julia tried using her phone for help, but discovered Mahmoud had changed the Wi-Fi password and blocked internet access. When she tried leaving the apartment, one of Omar's men stood at the door. Sorry, Dr. Weber. Orders from Mahmoud Bey. You must stay here tonight. Julia realized she'd become a prisoner, in a foreign city with no communication access, no money, everything in accounts Mahmoud controlled, and now legally compromised as participant in international criminal operations. On the fourth day of house arrest, Mahmoud entered with a grim expression. Julia, we have a problem. Dr. Hassan from the Ministry of Antiquities is asking questions about our excavation. Someone reported suspicious activity. Julia felt hope spark. So the operation will be investigated? Not if you help us resolve it. Dr. Hassan wants to speak with the archaeologist in charge. You'll tell him everything is conducted within law. I won't lie to authorities. Mahmoud moved dangerously close. Julia, you don't understand. If our operation is exposed, you'll be first arrested. We have documents proving you're the technical leader. You could spend 20 years in Egyptian prison. Julia knew she had no choice, cooperate or face life imprisonment as international art trafficker. Dr. Hassan arrived at the site on a hot September morning with two ministry officials. He was about 52, gray-haired, gold-rimmed glasses, serious demeanor of someone accustomed to uncovering irregularities. Dr. Weber, Hassan said after introductions, I'm responsible for supervising excavations in this region. I've received concerns about methods being used here. What concerns? Julia asked, noticing Omar positioned to hear every word. Reports of nighttime excavations, heavy equipment use, suspicious truck movements. Not consistent with standard methodology. Julia took a deep breath. This was her chance. Dr. Hassan, the techniques we're employing are unconventional. She emphasized the word strangely, hoping he'd notice. We're using accelerated excavation methods because, she looked meaningfully at Mahmoud and Omar, we're under time pressure due to international investors. Hassan frowned. Serious archaeologists don't allow investors to dictate scientific methodology. When Hassan asked to see cataloging protocols, Julia took him to the records tent. As she showed catalog cards, she whispered quickly in English, "Help me. This is a legal operation. I'm being held against my will." Hassan didn't react visibly, but Julia saw his eyes dart to Omar watching closely. Hassan remained 2 hours, asking technical questions, examining equipment, chatting with workers in Arabic. Julia noticed he discreetly photographed areas Mahmoud hadn't officially shown. Dr. Weber, Hassan said before leaving, I expect you to maintain the highest professional standards on this project. Of course, she replied, desperately hoping he'd understood her messages. After Hassan left, Mahmoud was visibly nervous. Omar tightened security. Move the most valuable pieces to the desert warehouse today. Julia realized it wasn't precaution. It was preparation for quick evacuation if authorities returned. 3 days later, early morning, Julia was abruptly awakened by Omar. Get dressed quickly. We're going on a trip. Where to? Questions later. Now hurry. Julia was forced into a van with Mahmoud and 3 armed men. They traveled hours through desert until reaching an isolated complex looking like abandoned military camp. Welcome to our main warehouse, Mahmoud said with sinister smile. What Julia saw made her nauseous. Huge warehouses filled with looted artifacts, entire sarcophagi, monumental statues, meters of papyrus, industrial quantities of funerary jewelry. Archaeological destruction on unprecedented scale. Mahmoud, this is mass vandalism. You've destroyed entire archaeological sites. We preserved what has commercial value. The rest was just old rocks. You're crazy. Those old rocks are humanity's history. Mahmoud approached with dangerous expression. Julia, you still don't understand. Dr. Hassan wasn't convinced. He's coming back with investigation team. And when that happens, someone needs to take responsibility. What are you talking about? You're going to take blame for the entire operation. You'll confess you organized everything, used your knowledge to identify valuable sites, forged licenses, coordinated international sales. Julia laughed bitterly. And why would I do that? Because if you don't, you'll never leave the desert alive. The threat wasn't subtle. Julia looked around, middle of nowhere, surrounded by armed criminals, no escape chance. That night, locked in a small concrete building, Julia made a desperate decision. She wasn't going to confess to crimes she didn't commit, but she wasn't waiting passively to be killed. During early morning hours when guards dozed, she managed loosening a window bar and escaped. She ran through desert darkness aimlessly, just trying to get away. But in the Egyptian desert, fleeing on foot at night is almost a death sentence. After hours walking, Julia was dehydrated, disoriented, exhausted. When sun rose, she could no longer walk. That's when she heard motorcycle engines. Mahmoud and his men had found her. Julia, you've disappointed me greatly, he said, dismounting. Now I'll have to take more permanent measures. Omar began digging a hole in sand. Julia realized with utter horror what was happening. Are you going to bury me alive? The pharaohs believed the desert was the path to eternity, Mahmoud said philosophically. You always wanted to be part of Egyptian history. Now you will be. Julia begged, cried, promised eternal silence. But Mahmoud had made his decision. Within half an hour she was in a hole 2 meters deep with only her head above sand, a small plastic tube near her nose to breathe. Goodbye, Dr. Julia Weber, said Mahmoud. Thank you for all your expertise. It was very useful. Then they covered everything with sand, leaving only the tiny air tube, almost invisible in the desert's vastness. Julia was buried alive in the Egyptian desert. With enough air for a few hours, no water, no hope of rescue. 18 hours. That's how long Julia Weber spent buried alive, breathing through a tube thin as a pen, sand pressing every inch of her body, feeling life slowly slip away through dehydration and panic. In early hours she screamed until losing her voice. Then came despair, followed by death acceptance. In her last conscious hours, delirious from dehydration, Julia talked to the mummies she'd studied throughout her career. Now I understand you, she whispered into darkness. Now I know what it's like preparing for eternity. What Julia didn't know was that Dr. Hassan had actually understood her desperate messages. Experienced in investigating antiquities trafficking, he'd recognized signs of a forced operation. Dr. Weber was clearly under duress, Hassan reported to Interpol agent Jonas Muller, who'd flown urgently from Berlin. Her answers were inconsistent. She used coded phrases and her eyes conveyed fear, not normal archaeologist enthusiasm. The search operation began when Omar, attempting to erase evidence from the camp where Julia was held, was spotted by surveillance drones. Under intense interrogation, he eventually revealed the approximate location where Mahmoud had disposed of the problem. A search team with sniffer dogs found the small breathing tube protruding from sand. When they began digging frantically, they feared finding only a corpse. "She's alive," shouted a rescuer upon hearing a faint moan from the sand. Julia was pulled from the hole in critical condition. Severe dehydration, sunburn, extreme psychological trauma, but alive. Paramedics later said they'd never seen anyone survive so long buried in the desert. "Water," was the first word she managed when arriving at Cairo hospital. Over the next 3 days, while Julia recovered under intensive care, the international operation completely dismantled Mahmoud's network. It wasn't just antiquities trafficking, Agent Muller explained when Julia could finally speak. It was the largest archaeological destruction operation ever documented in modern Egypt. Mahmoud al-Rashid, whose real name was Ahmed Hassan Khalil, had orchestrated a 5-year scheme involving forged permits, bribed officials and systematic destruction of unprotected sites. His specialty was identifying vulnerable European archaeologists and using them as unwitting technical experts. You weren't the first victim, Mueller continued. We found evidence of at least 7 similar cases, French, Italian, British archaeologists, all following the same pattern. What happened to them? Mueller hesitated. 3 disappeared, never found. 2 found dead in the desert in accidents. 1 French archaeologist escaped but was permanently traumatized. And you're the only one who survived to tell the whole story. The €200,000 Julia invested was never recovered, immediately transferred to offshore Cayman Islands accounts. But investigation revealed the operation had moved over €50 million in 5 years. The pieces you authenticated were crucial in tracking buyers, Dr. Hassan explained during a hospital visit. Your expertise helped us identify and recover artifacts sold to private museums in the United States and Europe. Most shocking was discovering the destruction extent. Mahmoud's network had completely ransacked 16 archaeological sites, destroying historical evidence that could never be recovered. Sites that could have rewritten our understanding of Egyptian history turned into craters in the desert, Dr. Hassan said sadly. It's irreparable loss to humanity. Mahmoud was captured trying to flee to Sudan with a truck loaded with artifacts. His network included 47 people: document forgers, armed guards, corrupt officials, international buyers. He planned to use you as scapegoat from the very beginning, explained German investigator Thomas Engelhardt during Julia's testimony. Records show he researched your profile for months before the first chance encounter. He knew about your financial situation, career, emotional vulnerabilities. Julia discovered his Zamalek apartment was only rented during victim periods. The family collection was stolen items used as decoration. The international investors were other network members playing roles. Even dinner restaurants were chosen because owners were part of the operation. Every detail of your Cairo experience was carefully orchestrated, Engelhardt continued. Mahmoud's trial became international news. Julia testified via video conference from Berlin. Doctors didn't allow travel due to psychological trauma. He destroyed not only historical artifacts but human lives, she said in testimony. He used our passion for history against us. He turned our dreams into instruments of cultural destruction. Mahmoud was sentenced to 25 years in Egyptian prison for trafficking antiquities, forming criminal organization, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Other network members received 5 to 15 years. But for Julia, legal justice didn't erase personal consequences. She developed severe claustrophobia, couldn't enter elevators or small rooms without panic attacks. Frequent nightmares where she was being buried again. Lost all confidence in personal relationships. I spent 15 years studying mummies, she told her Berlin therapist. I never imagined I'd almost become one myself. Financially, she was ruined. No apartment, tenants had damaged the rental. No job, museum hired someone else. No savings. At 40, she had to start life from scratch. Even worse was the guilt. My expertise was used to authenticate stolen pieces that financed further destruction, she said repeatedly. I unwittingly contributed to destroying archaeological heritage. Dr. Schmidt, her former museum colleague, tried consoling her. Julia, you were victim of sophisticated criminal operation. You can't blame yourself for being deceived. But she knew her Egyptology career was over. She couldn't look at Egyptian artifacts without remembering Mahmoud, the desert, the feeling of sand filling her lungs. A year and a half after the Cairo nightmare, Julia worked as a freelance translator in Berlin, avoiding anything archaeology-related. She lived in a small rented apartment, had few friends, rarely left home. Sometimes I think it would have been better if they hadn't found me, she confessed to her therapist. The Julia buried in the desert died there. The one who came out is just a shadow. But gradually, very gradually, she began rebuilding. She wrote a book about her experience, Buried with the Pharaohs, How I Almost Died Following My Dream, which became a German bestseller, alerting other scholars to international scam risks. If my story prevents one person from going through what I went through, then maybe it was worth it, she said in a TV interview. The book generated enough funds for her to establish a foundation dedicated to protecting archaeologists from international scams and recovering stolen artifacts. In 2025, 2 years after the nightmare, Julia finally managed returning to Cairo, not for archaeology, but to witness a ceremony where artifacts recovered from Mahmoud's operation were formally returned to the Egyptian National Museum. Dr. Weber, Dr. Hassan said during the ceremony, your courage saved not only your own life but preserved hundreds of priceless historical pieces for future generations. Standing in the same spot where she'd met Mahmoud 3 years earlier, Julia gazed at pyramids on the horizon. "I came to Egypt looking for history," she murmured. "And I almost became history." But she was alive. She was standing. And she was helping protect other dreamers from following modern pharaohs who turned passions into nightmares. The desert had tried claiming her forever. But Julia Weber had risen again, like the civilization she dedicated her life to studying. Wounded but not destroyed. Traumatized but not silenced. Some stories end with death in the desert. This one ended with rebirth in the sands of truth.